Nitro Family is one of those games that sounds good on paper, but it ends up being something else entirely in execution. It's a tongue-in-cheek FPS game focusing on dual wielding with a comic book-like tone, where you play as a guy named Victor fighting back against the evil Golden Bell Corporation who's kidnapped your son.
I'm warning you, give my son back right now!
Developed by Korean developers Delphieye Entertainment, it ran on the Series M engine and was pretty unique for its tone and setting, but also just in concept alone. I mean, a game about a dual-wielding comic book hero going around carrying his scantily clad whip-wielding wife Maria on his back, well, it's classic. How scantily clad, you ask? Well, for starters, it looks like she's been sewn into that outfit.
Damn, son.
All up, it sounds and looks like a recipe for success, right? Well, let me just spend the next 10 or so minutes telling you why that's not the case. If I had to dumb the whole thing down, I'd say it's like a watered down Serious Sam, with balancing issues and cheap and lazy level and enemy design, but the whole thing's not entirely bad. At the heart of the shooting is the aforementioned dual wielding mechanic, and this revolves around 3 different weapons: shotguns, rocket launchers and machine guns, and you can wield any combination of the 2 weapons dependent on what works best for you. Now, I always found it easier having the same weapon in each hand, so 2 shotguns at once, 2 machine guns and so forth. Just because trying to remember the different firing rates for different weapons I found kinda tricky. Having a shotgun in each hand or a rocket launcher in each hand I felt was essentially giving me the benefits of those weapons but with a faster firing rate, as I could fire one hand when the other hand was reloading and vice versa. Maria's more than a pretty face too, she's not just sitting back there twiddling her thumbs. When enemies get too close, she'll use her turtleneck whip, often killing weaker enemies in a single hit. She's also able to reload the weapons you're not using, and cycling through your available weapons is actually quicker than reloading them manually, which can be used to your advantage during combat. One of the power-ups in the game is a hydrogen canister, and it lets Maria fly around for a little bit, dropping bombs down on enemies and killing pretty much everything that gets in your path. You earn cash per kill in the game, and one of the main ways to earn more cash is by juggling enemies in the air. The easiest way to do this is just by shooting an enemy with the shotgun, which is going to send them airborne. Then you can just keep shooting them over and over, or swap to the machine gun or rocket launcher to keep the combo going. And this becomes essential in the last couple of stages. I actually started to hate this mechanic the more I played the game, mostly because a lot of the time it happens and enemies going to go flying into the air but not actually die, and then just get up a few seconds later and keep firing at you. What happens when you're using the rocket launcher, for instance, is you might send 3 or 4 enemies into completely different directions without killing them. Now, instead of having enemies coming from one direction, you've got them coming from 4, and it kind of throws your rhythm off. There's a really crappy minigame where you have to juggle enemies in the air and get them to land in these giant carts, trying to move them enough without accidentally killing them. Thankfully, this only happens I think like 3 times all up, but whoever thought of this deserves to have their head implanted up their own ass. The only other real unique mechanic is that when you take a certain amount of damage or earn a certain amount of points, the game goes all slow motiony and this ambient dreamy music kicks in as your damage is ramped up for a short period of time. This seems to happen most during boss fights, but also later in the game when you're just bombarded with damage from a bunch of enemies at once. It's a stupid mechanic though, and it doesn't really change things all that much, and it's interesting the first couple of times it happens, but then it just becomes annoying. Now look, I wanted to like this game, I really did, and I had a lot of people speaking very highly about it, enough for me to shell out $20 to buy it on eBay. But I've got to say, it's just a game that begins to fall apart the more and more you play it. All up, there's 5 stages, and the first stage is actually really good and kind of fun. Starting off in a colourful South American looking location, it eases you into things in some pretty well designed environments, giving you plenty of chances to take cover and without throwing too many enemies at you. There's a section when you're on a boat with a gun turret that looks like it's shooting out magical fairy dust, then another area where you're moving through a sort of desert and a factory that allows for plenty of circle strafing. But then it all just goes downhill. Stage 2 is where it all just starts to go to shit. Now, I think you're supposed to be in Vietnam at this point, and basically the whole stage is just one long corridor where you're just fighting droves and droves of enemies. It's a goddamn gauntlet. A lot of the time you're getting attacked from guys firing mortars, and there's this one part where it's literally coming out of an area you can't even see or fire into. And you've got to deal with a mortar firing like a dozen enemies that spawn from in front and behind you. It's just incredibly cheap design. You know, I honestly wouldn't blame someone if they stopped playing the game at this point. I was getting to that point myself, and the only way I eventually got through it was to save scum. Something which I'm not proud of, but look, it had to be done. The boss fight for this stage is a giant lab experiment gorilla looking thing that I only managed to beat when it got stuck in the staircase, giving me an easy kill. Doesn't get any better with stage 3. Now you're in some large open canyons being attacked by snipers you can't even really see unless you've got the sniper rifle, as well as falling boulders and suicide bombers. Except unlike Serious Sam, where the suicide bombers couldn't have been more obvious if they tried, the suicide bombers in this game often lurk around corners, then fly right at you as soon as you're in their line of sight. What's worse about the snipers in that first area too is that it highlights how needlessly expensive the other weapons are in this game. So aside from the basic guns, you can buy 4 other weapons. A push gun, which is utterly useless, a grenade launcher, the sniper rifle, and a more powerful rocket launcher. But the sniper rifle is only available to purchase at the start of the 3rd stage to begin with, and even then it costs about $50,000. Now that's just a huge sum because it's about double the cost of what you spend on the upgrades for the basic weapons. Upgrades which I think are kinda necessary as they increase ammo capacity and damage. So spending $50,000 on a weapon to use for one section of one stage is just exorbitant. And there's no way you'd have that much cash at this point unless you bypassed all the other weapon upgrades, which would leave you at a serious disadvantage in other aspects. The NPC that sells you all these upgrades is named Lisa, who looks like a grid girl for some reason, and aside from selling upgrades, she gives you handy in-game hints, like telling you to remember to quick save often, or telling you to take a rest if you feel nauseous and visit your favourite adult site. Yeah, really. If you find 20 credit cards hidden throughout each stage, you can even meet up with her in the last level while Maria's hacking a door panel for a quickie in a nearby hotel room. Now I couldn't be bothered doing this properly, so I just used cheats, but if you want to go ahead and find them all yourself, well, be my guest. I'd say that's the only pervy stuff in this game, but I'd be lying. When you take drugs in game, yep, you can take drugs, all of the enemies turn into bikini models for a period of time. Enemies in the last couple of levels are wearing G-strings and nipple tassels, and there's this huge display screen at one point with this never-ending loop of semi-nude women dancing over and over. Anyway, look, I'm getting sidetracked. The next part of the 3rd stage is a game of death homage as you climb this tower fighting enemies along the way, killing snakes that fall out of vases on the ceiling and what I assume is supposed to be a homage to the old Kung Fu game on the NES, before taking on the man himself, Bruce Lee, or someone who looks like him for a boss fight. Alright, you know what, I've got to admit, this was actually pretty funny and kind of awesome. In the next stage, you're in Russia, taking on sailors and these floating tin can looking robot things, which are probably one of the most annoying enemy types in the game. Simply for how random their movement pattern is. I mean, just look at them. Does this really look like fun to you? In the last part of this stage, we're on an aircraft carrier dealing with the same enemy lineup along with mechanics who can throw homing spanners before a boss fight against these 2 hit-scanning acrobats in mech suits. Funnily enough though, despite fighting 2 at once, I actually thought these were one of the easier boss fights in the entire game. But it does highlight another thing that kinda pisses me off, which is how the screen shakes when you take damage. And it happens all the time when you're hit by hit-scanning enemies. Now that's really a personal pet peeve of mine, and this kind of thing doesn't have any place in a horde shooter. Finally, we're on to the last stage set in Las Vegas, starting with a long trudge through the Hoover Dam, which takes upwards of 45 minutes and just seems to go on and on. I mean, it's easily twice the length of most of the previous stages. This stage also has not 1, but 2 types of turret enemies, and I hesitate to even call them enemies in the first place. Turrets are about the laziest type of enemy design and always the most annoying. They suck. After this, there's a level on the back of a truck shooting out more fairy dust, then another 45-minute trudge through the back streets of Vegas until finally the last level in a casino. And what they've got in store here makes everything before it pale in comparison. Yep, that's right, Sonny Jim, they saved the absolute worst for last. In this level, you're up against enemies who use the same weapons as the player, machine guns, rocket launchers, and shotguns, which sounds fine, except you react to getting hit by these weapons the same way the enemies do. Out of all the stupid design choices in Nitro Family, this one right here, has to be the dumbest shit in the entire game. I mean, just look at it. What the actual fuck were they thinking? If you slow that last clip down and count the frames, you'll see I go from pretty much full health to death in literally 1 second. I checked it in Premiere Pro, it's 60 frames. One of the main reasons the enemies also annoy me so much, aside from how they cause you to fly all over the place, is how quickly they put you into that useless power-up mode, where everything goes into slow motion. Honestly, I'd rather just be killed and restart from a quick save. Instead, it just wastes time. Once you've made your way through this relentless battle of attrition, there's a boss rush before you can finally take on the end boss himself and beat the game. And if you've managed to make it this far on your own, well, give yourself a pat on the back because you've really earned it.
Asshole.
Asshole.
Yeah, and I can't believe I've gone this long without talking about the music. My god, the music. It's completely horrible. It's the kind of trash that got rejected from some bargain bin skateboarding game you'd see on like the PlayStation 1. And a lot of the time it's some kind of annoying repetitive loop which lasts like 60 seconds and just plays constantly throughout the level. I mean, here's a couple of gems.
You know I love you, I always will. I set my wrist or take a pill. You broke my heart 1,000 times. I track you down and make you mine. You heartbreaker, my money maker.
Yeah, where did I go wrong indeed? You know, getting the balance right in horde shooters between challenge and cheapness is a thin line that not many games have been able to pull off. I think only really Serious Sam and the Painkiller games have ever really managed to do it well, and even they have their fair share of horrible segments. Funny thing too is that this is a game that uses the Serious Sam engine, and yet it has some of the most uninhabited environments at times. Like there's sections where you'll just be moving through these large empty areas with nothing even to shoot at. It's a shame too, because this has a lot of elements that should make it a good game.
Damn, son.
The dual wielding mechanic works pretty well, and changing weapons back and forth as you take on this barrage of enemies feels really cool and fluid. But like all shooting games, what really makes it or breaks it is the enemy balancing, and this one's just sadly all over the place, really letting the whole thing down. I know talking shit about games for being hard is like an automatic ding-dong banu, but balancing plays a pretty big part in this, and it's the difference between a genuine difficulty and an unfair one. But then again, it's a shooting game made by Koreans on a janky Slavic graphics engine. I don't know what else I expected.
Asshole.
Asshole.
But the only saving grace is the performance. This game runs really well on modern hardware. I mean, I had to download a patch to get the FOV working properly in widescreen, but it still loads quickly, runs at a smooth frame rate, and I don't think I had a single crash the entire time I was playing it. Now that is a goddamn godsend for FPS games from this time period. Overall though, Nitro Family just ain't very good, and the funny part is that everyone who tells me how fun it is hasn't played it in a dog's age, which I think is kind of telling. Now look, I don't want to piss in your cornflakes or take the jam out of your donut, but if you remember really loving this game and still think it's fun, well, maybe don't revisit it, and just keep telling yourself that that's the case. If you want to play games that do horde shooting properly, you know what I'm going to say. Go play Serious Sam or Painkiller. I mean, even the recent Doom reboot does a fantastic job of throwing a bunch of enemies at you and making it balanced and fun. Nitro Family has heart, but it lacks it where it matters most. A good game can age well over time, but a bad or average game is still always going to be average. And all of the casual sex, bikini models, and a thick, whip-wielding wife won't ever change that.